Well, that brings us to the second attack type, the weak passwords, and how those weak passwords make it easy to crack or brute force into your account. So take a look at this list. This list was based on over 5 million passwords that were posted or for sale on the internet. And just over 10% of those 5 million people used one of these top 25 worst passwords. I thought this list was kind of interesting. I expected most of them until I got down to, I think it was about 24. This Zach. I thought it was a kid's name at first. I thought, how many kids out there have a kid named Zach? How many parents out there have a Zach in their family? With a Q. And then it dawned on me as I started typing this list into the PowerPoint presentation. When I typed it, it dawned on me. Look at your keyboard. ZAQ, ZAQ1. It's all linear. It's all proximity, right? So it's just another easy password. It's funny, though, to me that many different people use that same pattern. As much as we like to believe as humans we're very unique, we share some commonalities with our fellow man. Okay, well, do the bad guys just try to log in as you with these top 25 passwords and then give up? No, unfortunately not. It's not that simple. But it is dead simple for them to write or download freely a password cracking program. And the way these operate is they get a dictionary file. All it is a text file. And it has one word per line in this text file. A word out of a dictionary. And there may be 65,000 or more of these guys in a single dictionary file. So they're kind of comprehensive. And I thought, well, how complicated is it to get one of these guys? So I just went to Google and I typed in download password file. And every link on that first page gives me downloads to a password file I can get for free. And so I downloaded one earlier before the presentation. And here's an example of one. So here's a password file. Not hard to see because of the size of everything. But I'll just scroll through this. That's cool. They've got my names in there. Michael is at the very top of the list. So that's exciting. Don't use my name as a password. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom and I can see how many entries they have, I think, 1, 2, 3, that's over 14 million entries in this particular one, which is a pretty comprehensive file. So what these programs will attempt to do is they will attempt to log in as you. Once they have your username or enough information about you, they'll try to log in as you on Facebook, or on Twitter, or on your bank website. And they'll write a program that tries to log in as you with that first password. Did it fail? All right. Let's say that one didn't work, and they'll immediately go to the next password. And that program will keep doing that. It will automate that for that person. That person doesn't have to lift a finger. It just runs in the background. So if I'm a thief and I have one of those dictionary files, what passwords am I going to put at the very top of that file and try first before anything else? Those exact ones, right? I'm going to take that top 25 list. I want the quick, low-hanging fruit. Again, it goes back to marketing. I want to get the quick and easy people to get the most return. You're exactly right. You're already thinking like a thief. You got to watch out for Donna Baker over there. Okay, so don't use any of those top 25 passwords. Any other advice? Absolutely. There are, what I put together, these 3 simple tips for better passwords. And you're going to see some of these and you're going to start to really dislike what I have to say, but hang in there with me. The first one is make sure all of your passwords have 12 characters or more. I hear you. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking 12 characters? Whoa, whoa, whoa. I can't even remember 7 characters. We'll get to that, so don't worry. But I got to tell you, it gets worse before it gets better. With tip number 2, I advise you use a different password for every single website or every single web service that you use. Now, this is the point where I imagined that half the attendees would leave the presentation and the other half would exercise their right to bear arms against the presenter. But hang in there because this last, number 3, addresses and helps, I think, with numbers 1 and 2. And it's this guy. It's this idea of password managers. And if you've never heard of a password manager before, if this is a new concept or you don't know a lot about it, hang in there. We'll talk just a bit more about what password managers are and what they do. So what it is it's usually in the form of a website. It's a service that a company offers. And you sign up for an account on there, and you will have a password to get into that guy. But then it's a vault that holds the account information for all of your other usernames and passwords. So you have one password that gets you in, but then that site remembers all the rest of your accounts for you. So the idea then is that you can, with the advent of this, you really don't have to remember all these separate passwords anymore. The large majority of your passwords now should then just be randomly generated. They should be very long and replaced with a single password that provides access to that vault. So it solves both that strength and that memorability issue for 95% of the passwords you have to mess with. And then you only have to deal with that 5% blue slice of the pie on things like the PIN code to your phone, or to log into a LetNet workstation, or to actually get into the password manager vault itself. That's the question, because again, if somebody knows there's a central resource that has all this information, they're going to be subject to attack too. So as a technical person, what I do is I look at what sort of security that they implement, and I can tell you that with these top list of these password managers on the screen now, these are ones that have been vetted pretty well. They make sure that all the information that goes up to them is highly encrypted, that it would take a very, very long time for any computer in this day and age to get to. So you're exchanging that flexibility for a very, very minimal risk. In this case, though, because you're actually getting stronger passwords and different passwords the majority of your places you're using, I would say you're better off than without one. Because most of us just inherently, even when we create complex passwords, they're not really that great at deterring a computer that's got an automated program that's going to try to break into my account. And we'll see a little bit more about that. But here in a second, I want to show you real quick, I just want to demo this idea of this password manager. So for example, I've got an account on Educause. So if I go to educause.edu and I load their website up, and then I click on login. So this login page comes up. It looks like a normal login page. I look up here, it tells me I'm secure. I have HTTPS, it's green. Educause.edu, I'm in the right place. But now I've got to remember what this is. If I use the same username and password for everywhere, which is in the past what I've done, it makes it very easy if you compromise one of my sites to get into all of them. And that's a problem. If I'm using a password manager, then I just go, I've used LastPass.com recently. I go to LastPass.com, I log in here, and I think I've got my personal login for LastPass is under my Gmail account. When I log in here, it's going to show me my vault of the accounts that I have set up. So in this case, I've already set one up for Educause. I can come here and I can actually look at the password I've set. I can just right click on that guy and copy. And I can go back to Educause and I can paste that password right in with whatever my account name was. All right, well that's good. I don't have to remember anything, but it took a couple more seconds to get to the other site. Well, here's the cool thing. Most of these password managers have browser extensions. And these are little software programs that just plug right into whatever browser you're using. So on Chrome, for example, I can go to the Chrome Web Store and I can search for this LastPass extension. And I can add it to Chrome. And I say, yes, I trust this extension. I want to add this. It's from the makers of LastPass.com, which is good. It starts to download this extension. It installs it for me. It'll begin to check the browser and make sure that everything looks good. And then once it's installed, it shows up here and takes me back to LastPass's site. I want to log in. I log in there, and now you can see I've got a little icon for the extension for LastPass up here in the top of my web browser. So I can close these out. And next time I go to Educause, it's going to know that I have that information saved in my vault. So when I go to log in, if all my settings are correct, see how this little icon actually shows up now in that username and password field? And see how my stuff immediately pops up? This is not a feature of the browser by default, but it's a feature of that extension that I just installed. So what it's doing is anytime it detects that username and password field on any website, LastPass is dialing in to LastPass as me, checking to see if it's got my information for that website, and it plugs it in. Super convenient, makes it highly flexible, makes sure that I have a strong password that's long enough, and make sure that it is randomly generated different for every website. This also has the added advantage that in the event that I do accidentally click on a link from a phishing email and I get directed to a site that is not legitimate, because that guy normally fills in my username and password for legitimate sites, If I go to a site and it doesn't fill it in, now all of a sudden that's a clue to me that that site is not what it said it was. If it were, my browser extension would have automatically filled in the username and password for me. So the fact that it didn't should give me pause to stop and go, okay, something's not right about this site. All right, so you probably, at this point, you're inferring that I really don't like passwords. I keep saying passwords are bad, and you go, all right, well, I just won't use one of those top 25 passwords and I'll be good. You know, I even have to have a password for a password manager, so they can't be all that bad. Except, make no mistake, the signal you're getting from me is correct. Passwords are bad, especially, like I said earlier, those seemingly complex passwords that we think we set. And I'm going to try to convince you with some information, but I also want to forewarn you that the next slide is kind of information dense. So I tried to soften it with a comic strip to make it more fun. So let's take a look at these guys. And by the way, this is from a poll on a particular technology website about the top password managers in use. Just in case you're interested, you want to write a few of those names down. I would recommend as soon as you get back to the office or back home tonight, you look at some of these. LastPass has a free version that I use. It doesn't cost me anything. There's a premium version that gives you some more features. It's $1 a month. If you want to sign up for it, I would recommend using it everywhere. So let's talk about this password and password complexity idea and why it's so bad. Well, we're going to break into some math, but let's start with some background information first. And that background info is this idea of entropy. And this is not high school chemistry entropy, but this is the idea of really quantity in information theory. The more information you have, the more unpredictable it is. And that's the idea behind this. And really, when you're talking about a password, quantity is just length. The longer your password, the more length it has, the more unpredictable it is, so the better it is. And that's why we were talking earlier about having a really long password, 12 characters long. And this is how it's computed. And any computer you buy today off the shelf, very basic, anybody has access to, can handle about 1,000 guesses per second. So remember those programs we were talking about earlier that run through those dictionary files? They're reading through those files at about 1,000 different guesses every second. So let's take a look at this comic that this one gentleman on the internet drew up. It illustrates this example a little bit. So it takes this idea of a password and we try to make it complex. So you see they took a base word, troubadour, and they put in some common substitutions in there. They substituted, it looks like, the letter O for a 0. They substituted the letter A for a number 4. They did not substitute that letter O for a 0. And then to try to make it more complex, because a lot of these systems require you to have characters and numbers and stuff, they added this special symbol and another number at the end. So to me, if I look at this as a human, I think this is a pretty complex password. The problem is it's also kind of complex to remember. This is not the easiest thing. You know, we substituted the 0 here. We didn't substitute the 0 here. Sometimes I've seen people substitute B's as the number 6, but they didn't do that in this case. So all that's just kind of it's really hard to recall all that stuff. And on top of that, if we do the math, there is about, make sure I'm telling you correctly, 28 bits of entropy in that password. So to give you some idea, at that level of complexity in that password, with any basic computer you can get today, they can brute force, they can crack that password, they can guess it in just a little over 3 days. Nothing fancy. Now imagine with all the power of cloud computing and all the stuff we're talking about now, where you have access to thousands of computers and somebody else's data center. Imagine how much faster that makes that process. And again, on top of all that, it's just kind of hard to remember. And so we didn't work through the math, but at this point, I may have convinced you, you don't like passwords, you don't like math, you don't like troubadours, you might even not like stick figures at this point. But let's see if we could do any better. And it's this idea of passphrases. So look at this, and this is the second part of that same comic strip. He takes 4 random words, and if I look at this, as a human, I don't think there's a lot of complexity to this. There's no uppercase, there's no special characters, there's no numbers, there's none of that. There's just 4 random dictionary-based words, all in lowercase, and he smashes them together. By doing that, simply the extra length that he's added has added so much more complexity. At this point, there are 44 bits of entropy to that password. And using that same computer that we were using earlier, it now takes over 550 years to guess that same password. And that's the other thing. It is easy to remember. That's the fun part. Is it's way easier to remember than all those weird substitutions and other stuff. Shoot, you may have already memorized this one. But we have tried for so long to enforce this notion of password complexity that we've done ourselves a disservice. We've made it more complicated and we haven't helped anything.
As far as the case, upper, lower case, does that make any difference?
For the complexity, it adds some, but not as much as you would think. The primary determinant is going to be the length. And we'll get to that here in a second because I want to share something that I think is going to address a little bit more on that.
It would probably not be wise to keep my full list to be my name, my husband's name.
Right, no.
That's not complex.
Right. And it's not wise at this point to use correct horse battery staple either. I can tell you now that password has exactly 0 bits of entropy. Why? Because if I'm a bad guy, at the top of every single password I've put, the password file, I'm going to put correct horse battery staple and target anybody who's seen this webcomic on the internet. And I'm giving you that recommendation based on the computing power available to people today. In 10 years, who knows where we're going to be at? And the recommendation may be, hey, we need you to have a 30-character password at that point. Or we may have something totally different, which is what I really think is going to happen. And I'll share that with you too. But if I'm a bad guy and my program has run for 20 to 30 days working on trying to get into your account with my password file, what am I going to do? What am I likely to do? Am I going to keep hammering at you after a month? You're exactly right. I'm going to move on to somebody else. So the idea is not that you need your password to be so complex it takes 1,000 years for a computer to guess. You need it to be just complex enough where somebody's going to give up. So, of course, we know the reality, though, is not as simple as these 4 words with all lowercase letters strung together. Years of IT guys, trying to enforce good password behavior has led us to doing some bad things. And so all of our systems today, they require you have special numbers and characters in uppercase and lowercase, right? IT department. Golly. So how do you make a simple passphrase that's long, that meets those complex security requirements, but is still easy to remember? Let's look at some practical tips for how to do it. And this first idea is this first letter's passphrase. And here's how it works. Think of something that's memorable to you. You said 4 words earlier. That's great. Here's an example. Let's take a sentence, something that means something to me. First house I ever lived in was 1103 Pine Street, period. Rent was $400 per month, period. Then we'll turn it into a passphrase by using the first character of each of those words or digits. So the capital T at the beginning of the sentence becomes the first capital T in my passphrase. The letter F from that second word becomes the lowercase f, the second character in my passphrase, and so on and so forth. And by doing that, I've introduced those numbers, and I've introduced this punctuation, and look how long it is. Now, if I were to look at this, not knowing the sentence behind it, I would think it's a really random password. And if somehow I saw Donna type it in, I would look at Donna and go, wow, that's crazy. How do you remember that? The trick is it has to mean something to you. The second one is this idea of PAO, or person, action, object. And I think this one's funny. This is a theory put forth by some computer scientists at Carnegie Mellon University who suggest that it has cognitive advantages because people are weird, and we remember better with visual shared cues that have totally outlandish and unusual scenarios. So we're going to select an interesting place. In this case, I picked Yosemite. We're going to select a familiar or famous person. I chose Jimmy Carter. And then we're going to imagine this really random action with a random object. Don't ask me how I came up with this. And then we use that story to generate the passphrase. So now we have our sentence again. And now we're going to use that technique from that first letter passphrase to create our passphrase again. And in this case, we have the length, which is the most important part. We have the uppercase. We have the special characters. So this will satisfy those weird complexity requirements put in by those draconian IT departments everywhere. But it's still something that, because of the way our brain works, you have a higher likelihood of being able to remember if it's something that means something to you. So you know that passwords are bad. They're easy to break. You should be incentivized to use a good password manager. For the few passwords you do need to memorize, now you have a couple of practical tips that you can use to try to memorize those passwords that will help make them resistant to those brute force attacks. And I keep saying passwords are bad and they should ultimately die, and you're wondering, okay, passwords are bad, but every single website, every service I sign up for wants one. What do you want me to do about that?